A big political row about climate change, the future of HS2, and will the EU really give us a better deal? This is Politics Live. Joining me, the Conservative MP Angela Richardson, Labour Mayor for the West of England, Dan Norris, Naomi Smith from the Best for Britain, which campaigns for a closer relationship with the EU, and Kate Andrews, who's the economics editor at The Spectator. Today, from cars to gas boilers, Rishi Sunak is thinking about making big changes to his net zero policies.
We're not going to save the country by bankrupting the British people.
Now Rishi Sunak is U-turning via leaks and midnight statements from the bunker at Downing Street.
The Prime Minister has been criticised and praised by his own MPs.
My reaction this morning is one of real concern. What has been trailed suggests a significant change in our policy.
The Prime Minister obviously has realised that some of those targets were not unachievable, but actually were going to impact, the common man and woman on the streets.
If we are privileged enough to be elected into power, I intend to build on that relationship.
Keir Starmer has met President Macron, but is a better Brexit deal really on offer?
This is about finally making a rapid connection from the West Midlands to the Northern Powerhouse, to Liverpool, to Manchester, to Leeds.
This high-speed rail line was meant to reach the north of England, but will that ever happen? Hello, and we start with that big story that was broken overnight by the BBC, that Rishi Sunak is considering weakening key green policies, watering down its pledges on net zero and using a more proportionate way, a more proportionate course of action. He would push back the ban on the sale of petrol and diesel cars and potentially also make similar moves with gas boilers. Now, unusually, we did get a response from the Prime Minister last night. We can see that statement now. Here, Rishi Sunak saying, for many years, politicians in governments of all stripes have not been honest about the costs and trade-offs. No leak, of course, referring to the BBC story there, will stop me beginning the process of telling the country how and why we need to change. He goes on to say we are committed to net zero by 2050 and the agreements we have made internationally, but doing so in a better and more proportionate way. So my question to the panel, really, to Angela, is this the right time to be changing policy?
I think what's really important is that, number one, we're keeping that commitment of net zero by 2050. It's a legally binding agreement. But we're going to do that in a pragmatic and practical way that takes the British public with us. I think leaks aren't helpful. We're going to get some more detail later on this afternoon. At the moment, it's just speculation. So we can't actually say too much on that right now. But I think it's important that the public has clarity, but also that they understand that the Prime Minister is willing to do the right thing by people. He will take long-term decisions, be honest, rather than short-term political objectives, which may work for today, but not for tomorrow.
Yeah, well, as you say, we now know we're going to hear Rishi Sunak is due to speak at 4:30 this afternoon. Dan, is it the right time to be changing policy?
It's not, but look, this is terribly orchestrated. I can't believe this hasn't been leaked from Number 10, to be very honest. The whole timing, the speculation, now we've got this announcement about 4:30. So that's very concerning because this is really serious. The cost is to the planet and the cost is to the people because we won't get the growth we'd otherwise have or need for our country. Great Britain PLC depends on a lot of very high technologies that are very transferable into dealing with the climate emergency. And if we're not part of that, while the rest of the world, America, puts billions into its new industries for the future, for climate change, same with Europe, billions of euros, and yet here we are being told that we're going to scale back, go backwards at a time when all the evidence, all the weather patterns even, are telling us that things are more urgent than ever.
Kate, is this the right time? Because we're hearing, even within the Conservative Party, there are those praising the Prime Minister's decision and those who are criticising it.
It sounds like we're about to get a dose of green realism from the Prime Minister, and I welcome it. The most important thing, if we really want to move to a greener planet and hit that net zero commitment, is to bring the public along with you. It's become very clear that the technology and the cost is not where we want it to be by these earlier targets, especially for the poorest in society. I think it's quite right that the Prime Minister goes in with some realism and adjusts that so we can keep people on board with the bigger agenda.
Naomi, realism.
Well, I think the Prime Minister has achieved something really quite remarkable this morning. He's managed to unite the energy sector, the automotive sector, and environmentalist campaigners against what it sounds like he's going to be announcing later today and that we heard of from the leak. I don't think it's politically astute when we look at the polling, when we look at Conservative voters. We know that climate change is a big worry for them and that they're in favour of a lot of this. But as Dan touched on, this is anti-growth. It is anti-ambitious for the UK. We have had a government that has presided over a decade of lost growth. And net zero represents a real opportunity to get ahead, to get investment into the country. And businesses make long-term planning decisions. They make investment decisions based on it. And if the goalposts keep shifting, then maybe they will shift too. That really isn't good.
That is something we are going to...
least of all the poorest.
Yeah, well, that is something... there have been statements through from Ford, big manufacturers like Ford, JLR this morning. That's something we're going to get onto. But, of course, this is a story which has led a lot of the, if not all of the papers this morning. If we take a look at some of them now, starting with The Times, we have Sunak set for retreat on climate promises, followed up by the Daily Mail, which definitely has a very positive spin on this story. Finally, exclamation mark, common sense on net zero. And then finally, The Guardian, Tory dismay as PM seeks to soften net zero pledges. We can speak now to Henry Zeffman, our chief political correspondent, who was one of the journalists here at the BBC who broke this story last night. Thanks very much for joining us, Henry. So what do we actually know?
Well, what we do know, as you were saying there, is that Rishi Sunak is going to make a speech this afternoon about 4:30 p.m. from Downing Street about green energy. What we also know is that this morning he's been in a previously unscheduled conference call with his cabinet, talking about what he's going to announce this afternoon. And what we also know is that all of that was rushed out because of the story we had last night. And I'll just highlight a couple of specific areas which we expect the Prime Minister to get into. We don't know what the final decision has been, but we do know that one of the things under discussion was shifting back the date when the sale of new petrol and diesel cars would be banned. That was going to come into force from 2030. It now appears that might shift to 2035. And similarly, a target for the end of gas boilers. That was going to come into force in 2035. We think that may well end up being loosened. But there's loads more areas which are apparently under discussion, and we'll find out this afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Rishi Sunak himself referred to this as a leak. As I said, you were one of the journalists who broke this story. How did it actually come to light? How did you get wind of this?
Well, that's the question. The Downing Street leak inquiry, I'm told,
I'm sure they'll want to know, Henry.
Yeah, and they've tried before, and usually I think they fail. But look, we had multiple sources between us who were aware of what was being thought about in Downing Street, and we spoke to them and built up a picture. That's always what we're doing in this job, is just talking to different people in different parts of government and trying to build as full possible a picture of what's going on. And as frustrating as I'm sure it has been for Downing Street, fundamentally, we thought it was a very interesting thing that the public would be interested in hearing about.
Indeed, and quite unusual to get that statement late at night coming through from Number 10. So I mentioned that there has been praise for the Prime Minister and criticism from within his own party. Can you draw that out for us a bit? What kind of things have we been hearing?
Well, look, there's a big divide in the Conservative Party, a debate that's been raging for a little while about what the appropriate extent of burdens, as they would have it, on people is in terms of ways to reach that 2050 legally binding net zero commitment. So you've got Green Conservatives on one side of that debate, and they're furious at what we revealed overnight. They believe that this is Rishi Sunak kind of rolling back what they see as Britain's world-leading position on the green agenda, on net zero. On the other side of the debate, you've got some people who've been pushing for ages for some of these moves that we understand are under consideration. They're delighted. I suspect, by the way, they're slightly more numerous than the Green group. And then I think you've got a lot of Conservative MPs in the middle. I've been asking lots of Conservative MPs this morning what they think about it, and a lot of them say, we want to wait and hear the speech and then go from there.
And what about the Labour response, Henry?
Well, so this is the thing. I mean, this has exposed a bit of a dividing line within the Conservative Party, but I think what Rishi Sunak really wants here is a dividing line against the Labour Party. And I think he's going to get it because my understanding is that the Labour Party is likely, I mean, they're waiting, of course, to see what Rishi Sunak announces as well, but they are likely to say they would reinstate some of the measures that they think Rishi Sunak is about to scrap. So that will be a genuine difference in the general election, which is almost certain to take place next year, a genuine difference between the two parties, not on the idea of net zero by 2050, but on the substance of how to get there.
OK, Henry, thank you very much. We will await 4:30 with interest. I'd like to bring in Carla Denyer now, who is the co-leader of the Greens in England and Wales. Nice to have you with us, Carla. You were listening to that. I mean, the Prime Minister is saying that this is a dose of realism. This is kind of being honest with people about the trade-offs where green policies are concerned. What do you make of that?
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on. I think this talk of pragmatism that I think we just heard from Angela and describing this move as proportionate is really a topsy-turvy, through the looking glass interpretation of what's happening. The UK was already not doing enough on climate change, and this is the Prime Minister making a dangerous and desperate U-turn, throwing the UK economy, as we've heard from businesses, the well-being of its citizens and the future livability of our planet out the window. For what? To chase a few votes from climate doubters in the next general election and their mates in the fossil fuel industry. It really made me feel a bit sick when I heard the news last night, because it seems that the Prime Minister doesn't care about the consequences, which will be higher energy bills for everyone, colder homes, worse health, fewer jobs, more dirty air and more climate chaos.
OK, Angela, do you want to respond to what Carla has said there?
Yes, absolutely. I think, you know, we have cut emissions in this country since 2010 by 40%. We've cut them further than any other G7 nation. We've done that at the same time as growing the economy by 60%. When colleagues around the table are talking about it's not good for growth, it's not good for investment, Jaguar Land Rover committed £4 billion of investment into Somerset in the West Country and 4,000 jobs. You know, we can absolutely do what we need to do to meet our goals and our targets whilst growing the economy and bringing people along with us. It's the right thing to do.
The right thing to do, Carla.
So why are these decisions that the government is apparently about to make today going to undermine that progress by making it harder for businesses to invest because they need the stability to know what government policy is going to be? It makes it harder for residents, for homeowners to invest to decarbonise their own homes. If we're going to decarbonise this country, and we have to, the science is super clear on that, then the government needs to provide support for people to do that and stability so that people can invest and plan for the future. All of the news that's been leaked seems to suggest the government is planning to do the opposite, to make it harder for people to adapt and harder for people to get us to a net zero UK. So it is, you know, the other points that were made about the importance of bringing people with us on this. Yes, absolutely. We need to bring the public with us. We need to make sure that people have the support they need to, for example, switch to a less polluting vehicle. So why is the government proposing to take away that support?
So, Carla, I agree with you, and I think most people around this table would, that the science is clear, which is why we've got that target for 2050. And it's why we want to, as world leaders, bring the rest of the world with us in making sure that we can all work together to get there. But we are living in a cost of living crisis, and I think we need to recognise what people's day-to-day costs and expenditures are. If I just listen to my inbox, I get a lot of people writing in on the climate, and they have incredibly helpful and useful things to say. But I go around and I knock doors in my constituency every weekend, and I've got some very deprived wards where people are incredibly worried about the cost of living. It is right that the government takes steps towards tackling climate change and meeting those net zero goals, but we've got to recognise where people are right now and then take them on that journey with us. If we don't take people with us, we will lose the argument.
Angela, may I ask a question?
Of course.
So one of the best ways of lowering people's bills and helping them in the cost of living crisis would be to insulate their homes. So why do you think the Prime Minister is proposing to scrap the requirements on landlords to improve the energy efficiency of people's homes to lower their bills?
So I agree that insulation is a very important thing for people to do, because most emissions come out of people's homes and buildings that aren't insulated correctly. However, we've got to wait for this afternoon, it's not that much longer, for a bit more detail from the Prime Minister as to what he is actually setting out, rather than speculation.
It sounded like the Cabinet were getting some of that detail in that meeting, that unscheduled meeting this morning. Dan, we touched on this a little bit with Henry. Will Labour row back on this and reinstate those 2030 targets?
Well, we'll have to definitely look and see what's said this afternoon, of course, and analyse that really carefully, because what I suspect is this is because of the mismanagement of the economy by the Tories. They're needing to roll back and save money in some way because they've blown it, particularly Liz Truss's administration. So that's why we're hearing all this drastic news. But Labour won't automatically say we'll replace things. We'll look very carefully, because as we saw under Liz Truss, when confidence goes in the economic world, you get huge problems that are very, very difficult indeed, and we can never go there again. And the Labour government won't do that. But we do want to make sure that we spend money and invest in the kind of technologies that are of the future, which is to do with the climate change that will bring significant growth to our country, which has not happened over the last 13 years. And it's not just sensible for the climate, it's sensible for us as a company, as a country, Great Britain PLC.
There are those who would say, look, Labour, with its own policy of the 28 billion in green energy, took a pragmatic look at the situation and said, oh, we need to readjust the timings on this. And that's exactly what the government is doing now.
And we'll see what they actually say. But our commitment is clear that we think the environment is significant. We think there's a climate emergency. We think we do have to do things like insulate homes. That's what I do as a Metro Mayor across the west of England. And unlike the person to the right of me, who may be getting stuff on her doorstep and from her constituents, the Jaguar Land Rover plant very near my constituency in the west of England, around Bristol, Bath area, people will be dismayed by this. Huge work has gone into getting that new battery factory sorted and getting it going. And now we're bringing in instability and insecurity. We've just seen the speculation today. It's crazy. It's crazy politics.
Kate.
Let's look at the slightly broader picture here. The UK is not an outlier in making these changes. Emmanuel Macron was calling on the EU at the start of the summer to stop all of the green legislation. Germany has been trading wind farms for coal plants. We've seen in Sweden the watering down of some of these targeted binding plans around net zero. I don't think that this is because Germany and France and Sweden are not committed to net zero or going greener. I think it's because they've realized that these short-term targets are not cost feasible at the moment. If we look at something like electric cars, the technology is great, but it's not there yet. And it's wildly more expensive by thousands of pounds to purchase an electric car. I'm an optimist. I suspect we'll hit net zero before 2050, because when the technology comes on board that is cost efficient, everyone's going to want to pivot to it. But until that happens, you cannot ask people to dramatically change their lifestyles or to find money that they simply don't have to insulate their homes, which can cost up to £20,000.
This is going backwards, not forward slowly.
Okay.
This is going backwards.
It's not going backwards. It's very blatantly saying we are going to stick to the plan to hit net zero by 2050, but we're not going to ask people who can't afford to do so in a much, much smaller time frame. That strikes me as reasonable.
The investment has to be there in order for the technology to come. And what we've heard today is that the investment could be put at risk because of the constant U-turns and shifting of the goalposts and the milestones on when things are going to come into force and be required by. Business is pragmatic. We've heard that word today. Pragmatic approach. It's business. It's almost a year to the day since Liz Truss's intervention spooked the markets. Maybe this is becoming an annual event for this government, that today is the day every year where a Conservative government
are spiking because of this announcement.
Well, no, but they're spooking business. We've had Ford, we've had E.ON, others coming out today saying, you know, this is not what we want. We want the certainty to be
But if you
able
look
to
at Germany,
make investments.
Germany
I
have
don't
moved
think
their
that-
targets, but they still want to get there by 2030. There is no reason, if you move targets, why you still don't have that ambition. And these companies have been set up for this for some period of time. There is no reason why moving these things does not stop business from doing what business does well, and that is delivering better for people.
Carla Denyer is still with us. Carla, I wonder if you want to respond to that point that Kate made, that there are costs for some people, often the poorest people, in relation to some of these net zero policies.
Yes, and that highlights the clear gulf between my approach, the Green Party's approach, and the Conservatives' approach. We want to see a rapid transition to net zero, but that has to be a fair transition, a just transition. And so that means that we have to support people to make the changes in their life, not expect them to do it and pay for it all out of their own pocket. So the Conservatives' approach is to make climate change individual people's problems. The Green Party's approach is to invest in better public services, in better public transport, because yes, at the moment, electric vehicles are more expensive. And that's why supporting people to get the bus, get the train, walk and cycle by making those the cheapest, most accessible and best quality public transport that we can get in this country, that helps by making the greenest option also the cheapest option and the easiest option. And the same goes for insulating people's homes. The same goes for generating energy. Renewables, wind and solar, is already the cheapest way of generating electricity in this country. And yet, what have the Conservatives done? Well, they want to only slightly tweak and not really lift the ban on onshore wind that they brought in a few years ago. They have run their offshore wind auction at a level that nobody wanted to bid. So that's, you know, doing a lot of harm to the previously pretty strong UK offshore wind industry. There's so many things the government could be doing that would be helping us to transition to net zero in a way that supports people's, you know, quality of life.
You repeatedly use this word investment, and that's a nice way of saying we want to spend a lot of money. And I'd be fascinated to know where you're finding that money. If you want the government to subsidise every household to have an electric car, to have a charging station, to insulate their home to the tune of tens of thousands of pounds per household, I'd love to see the budgeting on that. But as the world has learned, the era of cheap money has come to an end. We can't borrow like that. So if you want to take money from the day-to-day NHS budget, if you want to take money from rebuilding the schools that are crumbling down, I'd love to hear the Green Party be very clear about where that money is coming from. We do need investment. That's why I don't really buy. That's why I don't really buy the idea that business is truly upset about what's being laid out today. Because if they believe that this technology is going to be beneficial in the future, they will keep investing. But I would love to hear from the Green Party specifically where it's finding that money.
OK, Carla, if you want to come back, and then I have some of the quotes that have come through from business. So Kate doesn't believe them, but I could outline, outline
to be clear, I believe they're upset. I think they're upset because they were set, I think, to be in a position to take lots of subsidies. And frankly, if they think that this is the technology of the future, they'll believe that the payoff is down the road. They shouldn't be that upset about what is a quite small tweak.
Carla, do you want to just come back briefly on how you would pay for this?
Certainly. Well, I would start by taking away the billions of pounds of subsidies that the UK government is currently paying to the fossil fuel companies and to the aviation companies. That has to be the first thing to go. That will immediately free up tens of billions of pounds that can be invested.
We're not talking tens of billions. We're talking hundreds of billions, if not more. I'm curious, seeing as you have very strong opinions about this, where is the specific costing? Surely you have a big number, a broad number, but a big number for for the amount of money you need to find to insulate every home and give every home an electric car by the dates in store. And surely you have a spending side of the ledger of what you're going to cut. Can you just lay out those specifics for us?
I'm sure you noticed, Kate, that you cut me off mid-sentence there, so you probably anticipated I was going to do that if you hadn't interrupted me. So here goes. immediately taking away those subsidies will free up the first few tens of billions of pounds. There's
it's not
lots more
tens of
money in the
billions. What's the
economy
headline figure from the Green Party? Surely you have costed this. This is the crux of your economic agenda. Surely you have costed this. What is the headline figure you need to do that for every household in the UK, and what are you cutting?
Okay, let's let Carla finish here. Carla.
Thank you. There is plenty of money in the economy.
Okay.
What we need is the ambitious political decisions to fund what needs to be funded. So, for example, we would bring in a proper, not just a windfall tax, but a proper carbon tax on the most polluting industries and companies that will help to fund support for those that need support. It doesn't mean buying every household their own electric vehicle, but it does mean supporting public services, getting better rail, better buses, supporting homes to insulate, for example. And you know what else would help? A wealth tax. And that's something there's been a lot of talk about in the UK recently. It's something that's been Green Party policy for quite a while now. There's a few different ways you can do it, but to take one example from the University of Greenwich, if you applied just a 1% tax on the wealth of multi-millionaires, and only on their wealth above about £3.5 million, then that would make negligible difference to their lives, but it would raise tens of billions of pounds to support.
Wealth taxes haven't worked anywhere where they've been tried in the world. They've been rolled back in most of Europe. I think it is truly shocking that this is the staple of the Green Party's economic agenda, and it hasn't even bothered to do a back-of-the-envelope calculation about the kind of money it's talking about.
OK, we mentioned...
if I can just flag up one last thing.
Very quickly, Carla.
Kate will presumably be aware as an economics correspondent that the Office of Budget Responsibility itself has assessed that it will cost many, many times more if we delay climate action by 10 years compared to if we do it now.
It'd be great for the Green Party to show us those
Green
numbers.
Party policies will save the country money. Compared to what the Conservatives
we
are
mentioned
doing,
the negative. We mentioned the negative reaction from business. Chris Norbury, CEO of E.ON UK, said there is no green v cheap debate. He said this morning. He goes on, we risk condemning people to many more years of living in cold and drafty homes that are expensive to heat in cities clogged with dirty air from fossil fuels, missing out on the economic regeneration this ambition brings. Angela, that's not a good response from the CEO of E.ON there, is it?
It's not green v cheap. It's green v the reality of people's lives, what they're actually living at the moment. You know, I spent a lot of time as a Conservative MP defending things. You know, people think we don't care about people and the situations they find themselves in. It's not true. We care very, very deeply. Many of my colleagues who I've been discussing this with over the last 24 hours, I'm part of the Conservative Environment Network caucus, and I'm part of the One Nation caucus, that we get called all sorts of things on our side of the party, but we deeply care about people being able to afford things and to live their lives and to not put onerous costs on those people. Now, I agree with Kate. I think that the car industry will have its announcements out today as its reactions, but we need further detail about what the Prime Minister is going to say at Hubs4, and so do those manufacturers. They need the detail too.
Well,
can I just quickly...
Very quickly, yeah.
Carla, I think the Green Party don't give enough credit to where we are at the moment. 42% of our energy is supplied by renewable energy at the moment. We're going to keep going further, but if she thinks we're suddenly going to cut off fossil fuels in order to do our transition to net zero, I think she's living in a whole different other country. It doesn't work like that.
Dan, do you want to come in there very quickly?
Moral leadership. The UK as a nation over the history of the planet is about the second biggest CO2 emitter in the whole history of any country. We only make up 0.05% of the area of the land. We've got a responsibility, and not only is it the right thing to do to save the climate, but it's the right thing to do
you'd bring back those targets
and create wealth.
You'd be in favour of bringing back those targets?
Well, what I want to do is see what's said today, because I think this has been very orchestrated. I think there's a lot more to this than meets the eye, and when we have this inquiry, I doubt it will find that Number 10 is responsible, but I believe it to be so. It's pretty obvious to me. And what we need to do is look exactly at what's said and have a proper discussion then.
All right. Carla Denyer, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. But we are going to move on now and talk about Brexit. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, yesterday held what he described as a very constructive and positive meeting with the French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris. We can see them there having a handshake and enjoying what looks like quite a convivial chat. If we look at the Daily Mail report on this, here is the headline: Tony Blair, Macron and Keir Starmer's secret plans to reverse Brexit. How the ex-PM brokered Labour leaders' EU love-in on the day the bloc unveiled plans for Britain to rejoin as an associate member. Meanwhile, we can see another headline here, I think. Keir Starmer set to rejoin the EU. Overtures to join revamped bloc. It's a non-starter. That's from the Eye there. Yeah, he's rejected those, according to the Eye. So, Dan, why does the Labour Party think there is a better Brexit deal on offer?
Because we can see what's happening to our business, we can see what's happening to the cost of living, and we can see that.
Well, you can see the problems, but why do you think you can get a better deal? We've just seen years of terror,
Because I think the Conservative government, in all its guises, various people, Mr Frost and all the rest of it, had such terrible relationships with Europe that they made a path forward very, very difficult. And we have a duty, I believe, for our people, because I think that our country has a great future, but that is based on having good relationships with other countries, not just in Europe, but also in other parts of the world, of course. And Keir Starmer went to Canada to see Trudeau as well. So that's what we need. We need a resetting of relationships with all the countries around the world, not just Europe, to make sure that we get bureaucracy out of the way, so that they're not tariffs that cause difficulty, so that we can make sure that professional qualifications are recognised around the world, so that our very creative industries that we lead the world on, our artists, our musicians, can go around without needing visas in Europe, for example. There's lots of reasons why we need that reset of the relationship.
OK. So, Naomi, do you believe that the reset of the relationship, a warmer relationship, really can prove fruitful when it comes to the actual nuts and bolts of the Brexit deal?
Well, I hope it couldn't get much worse than the appalling deal that Johnson and Frost negotiated for the UK, which is a terrible deal for the UK, pretty decent for Europe. And Frost himself, Johnson's chief negotiator, has admitted within the last few weeks that Johnson always hoped for the Northern Ireland Protocol, part of it, to eventually collapse. They know it's a duff deal. Business knows it's a duff deal. So hopefully things couldn't get any worse. I think what we've seen with Starmer and his team visiting Europe is a much more trusted partner approach to doing it, not these sort of bad faith actors that the EU has had to negotiate with on our side over the last few years. And at Best for Britain, we've been producing, as Secretariat to the UK Trade and Business Commission, a cross-party group, over 114 policy recommendations for smoothing and enabling trade with our largest partner, which does stop short of rejoining customs union and single market. So it's not any rehash of the argument. These things, I think, are very palatable to many in the EU, but would require a negotiation with people who are trusted rather than those that have sort of been seen to row back on things that they said.
Right, but even sort of stopping short of rejoining institutions, there would have to be some kind of quid pro quo here, wouldn't there? Would we have to look again at freedom of movement and we'd have to offer something, wouldn't we, for a better deal?
So you've got this very much not good deal for the UK, which therefore by definition means it's a pretty good deal for Europe. So yes, what is in it for Europe? And there are things. So when you look at things like a reciprocal youth mobility scheme, the UK has them in place with other countries around the world already. When you poll that in the UK and in Europe, it's incredibly popular, allowing those under 35 to have visa-free access across Europe and the UK, I think would be very, very encouraging noises to be making to Brussels in exchange for some of the things that the UK might want, like beneficial alignment, like veterinary agreements, etc.
So and our security as well. That's why Keir Starmer was talking to Europol, because we have the best security services in the world and everybody wants to know what we're up to, and that's the sort of thing we've got to be making sure we're talking about.
Kate. I wouldn't describe Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak as a bad faith actor going to the European Union, and both have very clearly ruled out in different ways the idea of trying to opt back in. So this is fundamentally a question of trade-offs and which party will make what. The closer you want to get to that single market, which is treasured by the European Union under understandably so from their perspective, the more trade-offs you're going to have to make, more money being funneled into the EU, perhaps into the bureaucracy of it. This idea of the associate membership would include fees. It would involve the European Court of Justice. It could involve all kinds of things. And the question for Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer is not, will you bring us back into the European Union in all its glory? It's what are the right trade-offs here? And I think there has been an impact on business leaving the EU, absolutely so. But what trade-off are you willing to make? And both leaders are going to have to be very clear about that going into a general election, and the public will decide if what they're offering still means Brexit.
Angela, there are those in your party who would argue that it was Rishi Sunak who started on this course of this kind of warming the Windsor framework, being a little bit more flexible. He started it.
Well, I'm quite surprised at some of the comments that I've heard around the table, because Rishi Sunak has definitely proved as Prime Minister that he has got exceptional relationships with his counterparts in other countries. And we wouldn't have the Windsor framework had he not worked so cooperatively. I think, we get leaders of opposition parties going and meeting foreign counterparts. Ed Miliband did it. It didn't work out so well for him. But, what is Sir Keir opening the door to? Is he opening the door to 100,000 illegal immigrants as part of quotas coming to our country?
Big intake of breath from Dan there. Let's let him...
Well, look, I just think we need a reset in terms of the attitudes here, because it seems to me that people don't realise how Europe sees us and the rest of the world sees us. They see us as unreliable, not trustworthy, not sticking to our word, laughable. I'm totally amazed by the analysis, your analysis of how Rishi Sunak's seen.
Typical Labour talking our
crazy.
Country down. That is not how we are seen in the world at all.
Well, look, you were going to say that, I understand that. But look, what I think is really important is that we need to reset relationships, because you can't do any deals, whatever compromises might be needed in the future, unless there's fundamental trust and respect, and that isn't there. We couldn't have had a worse deal, and it's so bad that it doesn't just threaten our economy, it threatens peace in Northern Ireland. That's how bad it's been, and that has been hard fought for by the last Labour government, and it's really precious.
All right.
Okay. I think it's definitely
very briefly
depressing that we have Conservative after Conservative MP pulling the immigration card and all of those scare tactics that we heard at the referendum.
Angela, let you come back very briefly because we have to move on. Angela,
we should welcome it and celebrate
Brexit is a settled will of the UK people.
And
the idea
nobody's
of
disputing that.
reopening negotiations when we
Angela.
have no details about what the EU is going to ask for
We're
us.
not talking about reopening negotiations. There is a review.
Votes,
it's called a
no
review.
Thank you.
It is a review of the implementation.
Most of the British public
of the
all right,
deal.
okay, all right.
We
can't talk over each other because then the people at home can't hear us, and we're going to move on now and talk. Well, we're talking about reset. We're going to talk about HS2. Let's have a look at this headline from Monday's Guardian. Build HS2, say Northern leaders, as ministers refuse to confirm the Manchester link. This follows reports from last week that the government is planning to cut the leg of the railway beyond Birmingham. We can see a map now which helps explain some of this. So here we see the proposed route of HS2. The confirmed leg is in green. That's currently under construction from London to Birmingham. The now maybe in doubt portions are in orange to East Midlands Parkway on the right of your screen there, and then also the western leg towards Crewe and then on to Manchester, and beyond on the east side of the country is the part that's already been cancelled, which would have gone the eastern leg to Sheffield and Leeds. Now, in recent days, ministers have repeatedly refused to confirm whether the western leg of HS2 is going to go ahead. Angela, is HS2 going to Manchester?
Spades are in the ground and the government is committed to delivering HS2. I think government has been subsidising rail fares since the pandemic. They've been trying to get people back onto the railways. The investment is there, and
but this is rather what the minister did in the House earlier in the week. Is it going to Manchester? And people kept asking, and he wouldn't confirm. Is it going to Manchester?
Well, I'd like to know what Labour Party's position is on HS2 and what they plan to do with it. I think Northern Powerhouse Rail is very important. I think linking up the cities in the north of England, Transpennine routes, are incredibly important, but so are our links between the north and London. And so the government is committed to delivering on HS2.
To Manchester.
The government has changed some of the phasing of HS2 because it's been very sensible to do that with costs, but the government is currently committed to delivering HS2.
OK, all right. Dan, we have had some confusion in the messaging from the Labour Party as well, haven't we? We've had Pat McFadden saying certain things, Nick Thomas-Symonds then going on the radio and saying slightly different things. We can listen to, I think, to some of that. Here we go.
We want to see the railway being built. But we've also, like everything else, got to look at the costs.
We'll build HS2 in full, and we will build Northern Powerhouse Rail in full. So it's both to Manchester and indeed the eastern leg that you have referred to Leeds.
I wouldn't be a very responsible Shadow Treasury Minister if I didn't look at the final costs and if I didn't make sure that the taxpayer was getting
have you said that
final
to Nick
value
Thomas?
for money.
Have you said that to Nick Thomas-Symonds? Because he said it's going to happen in full.
Well, maybe he knows something I don't know, but I want to see the full costs.
Well, there you go. Dan, is it going to Leeds? I mean, there's more confusion there. That leg had already been cancelled. Are Labour building it to Leeds?
Well, what we need to remember is the high-speed link between London and the north was a Labour idea, which the Tories took on, and I'm pleased that they tried to do that. But what we've ended up with is rather getting from central London all the way up to the north, we've got from outside London, actually, or the edge of London, to Birmingham. So that's not any degree of success whatsoever, and it's very important because there's economic benefits and all the rest of it.
Okay.
However, what I'd say is it is our intention to connect the north with London on a high-speed rail system, but we are going to have to look at the cost, because I just think all the things we're hearing about, we were discussing earlier about the environment and changes there, and then the stalling on the railways. I think the country's getting pretty
That sounds
bankrupt.
like you're in the Pat McFadden camp, which is sort of, we are doing it, but at an indeterminate point in the future.
The Pat McFadden camp is a very sensible one. What he's saying is we need to look at the books, and we know about this because obviously we were in government for a long time, and we knew when you come into government, you've got to check that there really is the money to spend in the way that you want. And it won't be long now. We'll have a general election. We'll hear what people have decided in that election, and when we've seen the books, we'll be able to give you very clear answers.
Kate, do you want to come in there?
Nobody wants to commit to this project because it is astronomically expensive and it's going to be out of date by the time it comes online. HS2 was a bad idea to begin with. It's the kind of grandstanding project that governments love to promise because they'll never actually have to lead to the delivery. It was supposed to be £33 billion when it was announced. It's on track to be upwards of £100 billion. I think the current estimate is around £90 billion. And I fear that the sunk costs that have already gone into this are going to lead politicians to keep pushing ahead with it. We should redirect just a fraction of that money to real capital investment in rail, in infrastructure, in roads, in schools.
I mean, huge swathes of the country have already been dug up. It's pretty much built.
And there's clear evidence from business.
We have
that
a
they would
lot
benefit.
more money to go that we're going to completely waste on this out-of-date project.
The part that Kate is right on is that billions that have already been spent. OK, look, we have had a decade plus of lost growth. We've got billions sunk into this thing that may now not do what it set out to achieve to do. Any notion that this government can be trusted with the public purse has been completely shot to bits. And we can link this back to the previous story we were talking about, those net zero targets. What you have with rail infrastructure and high speed, you have to look at it in the round as the network. What high speed connection between cities can do is relieve pressure from the domestic lines.
Okay.
When they can be freed up, more people can get out of their cars and travel on the train.
I very quickly want to get to Dan's buses. Quickly, this headline: Metro Mayor denies free Bristol birthday bus travel is a gimmick. Dan, you've literally got 20 seconds.
I've got 20 seconds to tell everybody that
tell us what it is.
In the month of your birthday, you have free travel. Anywhere on the network, over 500 square miles, any time of the day that buses are running, of course, you can use them as often as you want. And the idea is behaviour change, because if people can use it for a month, I think they'll find that the buses in our region are fantastic.
Angela, yes or no? Bring it in everywhere.
No. How many people have a birthday? How much is this going to cost? Could
OK, I'm afraid that is all we have time for. Joe Coburn will be back tomorrow. Goodbye for now.
The Wheel is back with more hilarious